Yep, we're live, I think. Good morning again. Morning, anybody who's watching this live streamed meeting of the Licensing and Appeals Subcommittee of Craven District Council. I'm Simon Myers. I'm chairman of the Licensing Committee. Councillor Morby, deputy chairman of the Licensing Committee. Councillor Whitaker, a member of the Licensing Committee. We also have present Hannah Scales, who's support for this committee, Alex Strickland, who's our legal advisor, Sharon Lord from Environmental Health at Craven District Council, Sergeant Jackie Booth, and I think Sergeant Jackie Allen as well. Good morning. Tim Chadwick, who is our licensing manager, and then I see Mr. Baker, Mr. Grunnett. Is that right, Mr. Grunnett?
Yes, sir. Anything in that field will do. Yes, that's perfect.
Mr. Grunett's here to speak on behalf of Mr. Baker and Mr. Dovener, who I think is. So we'll progress with the meeting now. If I could just ask people to keep themselves muted apart from when they're speaking. And if you wish to speak, please raise your virtual hand. If you have problems with that, raise your actual hand and it, and certainly either Hannah or will fine. Apologies for absence, Hannah. None, I take it. No. Point of a chairman for the hearing. Members?
I propose you, Simon, as chairman of licensing.
Thank you. All right with you, Paul?
Yes, I've just muted myself. I'll second it.
Declarations of interest. Well, if I could say that obviously as a Gargrave lad, I have been subjected to the opinions of various people about this and indeed many other matters, and I take no account of them whatsoever. But I'm sure Mr. Baker will appreciate it has been the subject of gossip in the village, and however much I dislike it, I do hear it. But it colour my opinion. And Alex will, of course, take no account.
Chair, just to remind members, of course, that they need to keep an open mind on the matter right up until the point of decision. Members will appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we're here to deal with an application for a review of the premises licenses of the Mason Arms in Gargrave. Alex, do you want to just outline the procedure?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The licensing report will be presented to start with, and then each party will get an equal time. So I think the way that you do it, Chair, is that the police will get 10 minutes to present their case. Then the environmental health officer will get a chance to make their representations. Mr. Dovener as well, I think, if he wishes to, will then be allowed to say something, and then the representative for the license holder will get 10 minutes to make their representations, and I think usually allow 5 minutes for each side to sum up at the end, Chair, if that's, and then there's questions in between as members wish to do it. That's helpful, Chair.
Thank you, Alex. If everyone's happy with that, I mean, obviously, if you think there are important things that need to be said, and it's outside the not a house rule, any representation, so just let me know. Means, and I would also say that if anybody needs a break, please just let me know. You're not in here. We can have a break, and when people. Right, I think Tim, well, over to you, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I start, I just want to confirm that yesterday afternoon, some additional supporting documents, positive representations were received from Mr. Gruner on behalf of Mr. Baker. Have the committee received and viewed these?
Yes, I should say, Tim, we have seen those
Yeah.
and all the papers in this. Every member has read carefully. We've now seen the CCTV and the police video footage. And so I think everything.
Thank you, Chair. As you've stated already, the report before you is to consider the application for the review of a premise licence for the Masons Arms in Gargrave. Members are reminded that when determining what action, if any, is required, that any decision is made with a view of promoting the licensing objectives. For a point of references are laid out at point 2, along with the steps that the subcommittee may take today. The application to review has been instigated by North Yorkshire Police, seen at Appendix B, pages 16 to 91. It's detailed, and I'll leave a summary of this for North Yorkshire Police to go through. Though as part of the submission, the video footage, as you say, has been viewed by the committee in private and has been viewed by myself, Environmental Health, and Mr. Grunert and Mr. Baker. The application to review has been served on all the responsible authorities and published on the council's website and at the premise for 28 days. We've received one representation for Environmental Health, and Sharon Lord is present today to put that across. This can be seen at Appendix C. We've received 2 further representations of support for the premise. One can be seen at Appendix E, and Mr. John Devoner is here today, so I'll allow him to go over that himself. And we've received one positive representation from EI Group, who own the building as well, and this can be seen at Appendix D. Before making a decision today, members are asked to consider the relevant parts of Section 182 guidance, and parts of these of particular relevance are contained in the report for you on page 4. Members are also required, before making a decision, to consider the representations contained in the report and those that will be heard today. So the matter before you, members, is the application to review initiated by the police, and really there's not much else for me to add at this moment in time, but I will be able to answer questions as we go through and to provide a bit more of a summary later on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tim. I don't know if anybody has any questions for the licensing manager at the outset. I see Mr. Grant shaking his head. Members, no. No, great. So, Sergeant Booth, are you presenting the case for the police?
Good morning, Chair. I am, yes.
Thank you. Well, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I am Sergeant Jackie Booth, and I am the Force Licensing Manager for North Yorkshire Police. Members of the committee, you will have had time to consider all the evidence that North Yorkshire Police has placed before you, including the video evidence from the 4th of November and the 23rd of December. My colleague, PC Jackie Allen, and I are willing to answer queries in respect of any submitted evidence placed before you today. The police do not take the licence review process lightly, but it has been a hugely difficult year for the hospitality industry, and it is simply not right that the Masons Arms, despite attempts by responsible authorities to work with the premises licence holder and DPS Mr. Baker, he has continued to flagrantly disregard the restrictions when other businesses have adhered to them. Despite the advice and guidance from Environmental Health and Police, the business put the local community at risk at a time when infection rates were on the increase, and it's unacceptable they ignored the restrictions. These measures are intended to secure the health and safety of Masons Arms staff, customers, and the wider community by reducing the opportunities for a potentially fatal respiratory infection to spread during a national pandemic. This is not a case involving a one-off, inadvertent or unavoidable minor breach of technical requirements due to the COVID-19 pandemic. nor is it an innocent misunderstanding of complex legislation. These breaches have occurred despite engagement, advice, and warnings from responsible authorities who have invested a considerable amount of time trying to work with the operator to ensure compliance and protect the local community. The police say that the breaches are the result of deliberate, reckless, or at the very least, grossly negligent actions by the premises licence holder in order to further their commercial interests. This premises has operated without paying any serious regard to the wider consequences to the community in respect of their actions during the national pandemic. NYP have had no option than to consider a review in respect of the serious undermining of the licensing objectives by the premises licence holder. There appears to be very little effective managerial control over the premises, and this is evident from the body-worn video. And if I can refer you first to the body-worn footage from the 4th of November, and specifically the following. At that time, the premises were subject to Tier 1 restrictions. The premises posted on social media on the 23rd of September. I refer members to Appendix 16, which is the social media post of the rules which apply to the business, setting out specifically the 10 p.m. closing. Officers attended on the 4th of November, bearing in mind a national lockdown has been instructed by the government to commence at midnight on the 5th of November. The premises is open past 10 p.m. At 23:40 hours, officers attend the premises and upon hearing loud music enter the premises. The premises licence holder and DPS, Mr. Baker, did not, upon police officers immediately entering the premises, put himself forward to identify himself as the person in control or management of the premises. At 23:41 and 18 hours on the footage, a police officer has to ask who is the licensee. At this point, Mr. Baker identifies himself and is seen not to be wearing any mask. Despite being caught operating in contravention of regulations, he does not take control or manage the situation. He doesn't turn the music off and he doesn't advise people to leave. It is the police that disperse the customers. At 23:40 hours and 33 seconds, Mr. Baker is heard to say, "It's the last night," as though that is a justifiable reason to continue to have the premises to operate in violation of the regulations. At 23:40 and 50 seconds, Mr. Baker then questions, "Have you had a complaint or were you just passing?" At 23:41 and 13 seconds, there is a male seen approaching from behind the bar area, again, not wearing a mask. It's unknown if this is a staff member or a customer being allowed to just help themselves. At 23:42 hours and 7 seconds, there is a female customer who goes to exit the premises, not wearing a mask, but then returns and embraces Mr. Baker prior to leaving. 23:42 and 33 seconds, another male walks past Mr. Baker and they shake hands. And again, a third male at 23:42 and 46 seconds walks past Mr. Baker and shakes his hands. Members, that video footage speaks for itself in that there is no management or responsibility by Mr. Baker at the time for his actions, no social distancing from customers, and in fact, on 3 occasions, there is physical contact between the licensee and members of the community, patrons frequenting the premises. As a result of this serious breach of the health protection regulations from that date on the 4th of November, I requested a meeting at Skipton Police Station with Mr. Baker, a representative of EI Group who leased the premises, Environmental Health and the Licensing Authority to discuss the serious concerns. At this time, I informed Mr. Baker that I was considering a review given what I'd seen on the officer's body-worn video and their written statements. I asked the EI representative what action they would consider on seeing the evidence, but they advised they would not want to take the premises licence back from Mr. Baker as he had a signed tenancy agreement. Mr. Baker provided reassurances that he would implement additional measures such as CCTV at the premises and agreed to a premises improvement plan. He stated he would work with responsible authorities to ensure compliance with the regulations going forward. Mr. Baker was left under no illusion that any further breaches of the health protection regulations or undermining of the licensing objectives would lead to a review. As members can see, a premises improvement plan was implemented on the 16th of December, and PC Allen attended the premises with Environmental Health Officer Sharon Lord and Craven Licensing Manager Tim Chadwick. Despite the engagement from responsible authorities, the premises licence holder and DPS has failed to step up and ensure he adhered to current regulations, thereby promoting the licensing objectives of prevention of crime and disorder and public safety. Following the meeting on the 16th of December, 7 days later, on the 23rd of December, North Yorkshire Police received a report that the premises were not adhering to the current COVID regulations, in that 8 persons were sat around tables and there was no evidence of food being served. And Appendix 19, the police report, refers to that. As a result of this incident being reported, CCTV footage from that date was obtained from the premises, and for which you've had an opportunity to view those footages. Details of the clips are contained in the statement of PC Allen, Appendix 22. The footage from within the premises shows again that Mr. Baker has no effective control over the premises. He is sat socialising and drinking with persons within the pub, lets customers get up and walk to the bar, despite it being a requirement for table service, and moves around to different tables himself, interacting again with members of the public. Following reviewing this footage, an online meeting was arranged with Mr. Baker and concerns raised in relation to the lack of control and management in respect of ensuring that regulations are complied with. His response was that it was difficult to get people who have been coming to a bar for 30 years to change habits. Members of the committee, people across the UK and in fact around the world are having to change their habits of a lifetime due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Responsible operators should not be ignoring the regulations, but actively encouraging and ensuring patrons comply, and if they fail to do so, should refuse to allow those patrons to remain on their premises. Mr. Baker has failed to take any responsibility for the effective management of the premises. Members, I would like to address the representation made on behalf of EI Group from Goschalk Solicitors. I note the comments that in some of the reports from the police, there is no evidence of any breaches of the health protection regulations or the undermining of licensing objectives. Members, the reasons why North Yorkshire Police have submitted this is twofold. Firstly, we have been open and transparent, providing all information we hold relating to the premises, which involves calls for service, even when they have been unsubstantiated, ensuring you have all available evidence before you. Secondly, as a result of those reports, engagement has been made with Mr. Baker. Firstly, on the 27th of March, following liaison with Craven District Council, Tim Chadwick contacted Mr. Baker, ensuring he was fully aware of the regulations to ensure compliance. The further attendance by PCSO Twig on the 23rd of April, Mr. Baker was also engaged, and again the regulations discussed, to which he stated he was fully aware. Given that Mr. Baker was aware that reports were being made to the police and the local authority, and he had been the subject of checks, most responsible operators would ensure they continued to meet the legal requirements and not take a risk by flagrantly breaching the regulations, which is then what he has gone on to do on more than one occasion. It is interesting that no members of staff have submitted representations in support of the premises, and that only one representation, although I appreciate that the additional documentation yesterday provides 4 additional members or reports from the local community in respect of the premises. However, it is unknown if any of these parties have been subject to the visits, notably the 4th or the 23rd of December, and observed what you have seen from the video footage. Given the above, NYP have no confidence that this licence holder or DPS has either the competence or willingness to promote the licensing objectives, in particular preventing crime and disorder, preventing public nuisance and public safety. Nor do NYP have any confidence that the operator will abide by the regulations and provide a COVID secure premises, given the government's roadmap strategy if they were permitted to open for licensable activities in the forthcoming months. The subcommittee is entitled to take robust, appropriate and proportionate steps warranted in the public interest to achieve the twin aims of preventing this operator from further undermining the licensing objectives and also deterring similar behaviours by this operator or other operators. A breach of the health protection regulations is a criminal offence and so engages the prevention of crime and disorder licensing objective. However, it should also be borne in mind that regardless of the specific terms of COVID-related restrictions and regulations, all licensed operators are subject to a more general duty under the Health and Safety at Work 1974 Act to protect the health, safety and welfare of their employees and other people who might be affected by their business. This includes staff, customers and the wider community. Operators must do whatever is reasonably practicable to achieve this aim. The steps available to you in considering this matter in line with the Section 182 guidance are to modify the conditions on the licence, to exclude a licensable activity from the scope of the licence, to remove the DPS, to suspend the licence for a period not exceeding 3 months, and to revoke the licence. Members, as part of the review process, NYP has engaged with the EI Group, who are the freeholders for the premises, and advised that given the continual breaches by Mr Baker and his partner who run the premises, by staff employed by them, we cannot support them as the premises licence holder or DPS. Even if you choose today to remove Mr Baker as the DPS, he is still the premises licence holder, and both he and his partner would continue to be involved in the management of the premises. A DPS could be employed by them, but it is believed that they would not be a viable outcome given their overall management of the premises. The statutory 182 guidance states the following at para 11.22. Equally, it may emerge that poor management is a direct reflection of poor company practice or policy, and the mere removal of the designated premises supervisor may be an inadequate response to the problems presented. Members, the police would respectfully ask that you revoke this premises licence, as it is evident that Mr Baker has repeatedly failed to demonstrate he is a responsible operator. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sergeant. I think, Mr. Grunnett, do you have any questions for the Sergeant?
I do have a number of questions, Chair, with your permission.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Sergeant, for summarising your review. You didn't include, or can I just confirm, your role at North Yorkshire Police and how long you've been in that post, please?
I am the Force Licensing Manager for North Yorkshire Police, and I have been in the role since the 1st of January 2018.
Thank you very much. So I appreciate the following is a gross sort of simplification, just taking some of the words that you presented there to the committee. You have a loss of confidence or no confidence in Mr Baker's future management of the premises, hence the review application. I appreciate all of the other evidence, but I think you summarised it that way. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Thanks. Can we just go through the first 5 incidents in date order very briefly? So you're right, you referred to comments from Mr Chadwick and yourself about an incident 27th of March where there is a complaint of trading despite lockdown 1, but that isn't substantiated at all. There's no substantiation to that at all. You spoke to the premises, they refuted that at the time, is that correct?
It was Mr Chadwick. We referred the incident report across to Mr Chadwick, and yes, that is correct, and that is included as part of our submissions.
It absolutely is. No, I completely agree that it's in there. I just wanted to pull these points out and highlight them as we go through you. I'm sure the committee will appreciate it. Again, so the 28th of March, the same position with the 28th of March. But the 24th of April, slightly different insofar as your officers attended and their reports directly contradict the complaint. Is that correct?
So officers attended, if you're referring to the statement of PCSO Twig, who was engaged with Mr Baker. So the report obviously came in that there were persons at the premises. The report believed that was in contravention of the regulations. So an officer was dispatched, which was PCSO Twig. She attended those premises. She did encounter 2 meals at the rear of the premises. I think that is all detailed in her statement.
Okay.
She was satisfied at that time that there was no breach of the regulations, that it was in line. She engaged with, she describes in her statement as the licensee, who stated that he was preparing food, which is entitled to do at the time. So the report was finalised as an officer attending and identifying that no breaches had occurred on that occasion.
Thank you very much. That's exactly, yep, thank you. That's a very full answer. That's I agree. That's what I was trying. And the 25th of April, another complaint, but police attendance there, which is, we have the storm incident reports. When they attend past the venue, it's locked up, that there's no sign of that. Their view of the premises, it doesn't support, in fact, contradicts the complaint again on the 25th of April.
That report, an officer was dispatched, I think it was some 30 minutes after the report has come in. So they attended 30 minutes after, and the premises was closed. And again, that report was finalised.
Thank you. And then again, on the 4th of June, the same situation again.
Correct, yes.
That's fine. Thank you very much. As you were aware, and I think Mr. Chadwick is aware because it was discussed with my client, there were two issues or two circumstances relevant to those. The takeaway service that your officers saw, and secondly, as they are a hotel accommodation, they were housing key workers from Yorkshire Water, so there was some coming and going to the building, and they may, do you think they could have contributed to the complaints, that people saw this other activity which was legitimate and mistook it for illegitimate activity?
They may have done. If I can comment on a professional level, the police have received numerous reports, obviously, during the first lockdown. I think certainly local communities were reporting anything in relation to any hospitality venue, and they were obviously unsure of exactly what the regulations were. I felt it was only relevant and proportionate to put in, as I said in my submissions, all details, because as I've highlighted, there was nothing to substantiate those earlier reports. And I wanted to be open with the committee and all parties regarding all information held.
Your first meeting, in fact, I'm not sure if you were at the very first meeting, should we say the first meeting with your officers and Mr. Baker took place on the 12th of November 2020, is that correct?
That's correct. That was PC Allen who attended that meeting in relation to the breach that had occurred on the 4th of November.
So between the 27th of March and the 12th of November, your team never spoke to Mr. Barker about any of these matters. I know you passed comments to Mr. Chadwick, who dealt with them, but you didn't see a need to talk to Mr. Baker yourself about any of these matters.
We spoke to the PCSO and were satisfied following that we didn't need to contact him.
Okay. So you put them in as background, but would you agree with me there's little weight or significance to those instances, the 5 instances? There's not even a little bit of a whiff of smoke. There's certainly no fire there, is there?
No, I think it. I think that as I've said, it's twofold. It shows openness and transparency that whilst we'd had calls for service, there was nothing to substantiate those. However, both the council, the local authority and the police had spoken to Mr. Baker, and I think it alerted him to the fact that persons were contacting responsible authorities concerned about the operation of his premises.
But your findings were there were no incidents.
Correct, yes.
No incidents for those. Thank you. So on the 4th of November, there was a serious breach of the COVID regulations. You pointed to a statement published in September by the premises about what were measures implemented. After that statement on Facebook, the what came known as lockdown 2 was announced after those September statements. So they don't reflect the September statements. It's not a statement about the last day of trading before lockdown 2. There's slightly different issues there. From the reports that you've cited, you've taken the officers to, I think the council to, which is Appendix 9 of the bundle. Just to clarify the time frame, you're very specific, and I appreciate how specific you were in your presentation. But just to clarify, Appendix 9, John Perrett's statement, on his, I believe, 6th paragraph, it states that they arrived at the premises at 23:40 hours. Is that correct?
So there was 3 officers that attended the premises who all provided statements, and yes, their body worn footage was activated upon arrival. So yes, I think you've said it. Third paragraph down. Did you say? I'm just
fifth, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, even if I can count. Sorry.
23:40 hours.
23:40. Thank you there. And that footage that the council has seen, you see the officers walking through from an external area into the pub, and that's 23:40. Over the page, the penultimate paragraph states, I did express my thanks for the cooperation in emptying and closing the pub, and we resumed patrols at 23:50 hours. So within 10 minutes of their arrival, the premises is closed and cleared, and that officer noted in his statement that the premises had cooperated with the clearing down the premises, which is slightly different to how you're describing it. I wondered why you described it slightly differently to that.
Because the officers have obviously attended a call for service in relation to the premises operating in contravention of the 10 p.m. curfew.
Yeah.
They've had to ask and identify who the licensee is, which from my professional opinion, I would expect if a police officer walks into a premises that the designated premises supervisor identifies himself as they are the person with day-to-day responsibility. There's been a hesitance and reluctance, I think, from viewing that footage until an officer actually asks who is the licensee and who's responsible for obviously the premises.
Absolutely. Well, it's your interpretation of the footage, and Sergeant, I appreciate that. And obviously, the councillors will form their own view of that footage as well. They may entirely share your interpretation, but it's not a matter for us. What we say about the 4th of November, this isn't my presentation, but I think it's important to be clear that we accept that what went on the 4th of November was entirely incorrect and was a serious breach of the regulations. And we in my presentation will be addressing that more fully. This is not in any way leading to a suggestion that what went on the 4th was correct. Your first meeting, excuse me, I keep saying your first meeting, but I'm just here. You were at the meeting on the 12th of November, were you?
PC Jackie Allen was at that meeting, and she is here today, should you wish to direct any specifics of that meeting to her.
Right. Perhaps if the councillors would, it's just about my demeanour of my client at that meeting and how long the meeting took. I wondered whether that would be better questions for Jackie. If you
yes, by all means. I'm sure PC Allen doesn't mind. She's here, so.
No, I'm more than happy to assist.
Thank you, PC Allen. I'm very grateful. You provided in the papers an action plan, Appendix 18, which summarises, if I'm correct, the meeting after the 12th of November, summarises the action plan that was agreed at that meeting.
Yes.
You were present at that meeting along with Mr. Baker, with a representative of the ultimate landlord, the EI group, and other representatives, I think, of the local authority. Is that correct?
On the 12th, are you
Yes,
addressing?
On the 12th.
On the 12th, I attended there with a police officer who had body worn footage. I met with Mr. Baker, his partner, and also Tim Chadwick and Sharon from Craven District Council.
Right. And at that first meeting with Mr. With Mr. Baker, was he apologetic? Was he candid? Was he cooperative? Or was he evasive and anyway sort of uncooperative?
No, he was. Sorry, was there somebody else in the background there?
No, sorry, it was me interrupting. I apologise.
All right. No, he was compliant. Say as we entered, obviously we sat down and we discussed in length the 4th of November's incidents. He realised the seriousness. He was apologetic, absolutely right. But again, as I say, I went through the COVID regulations, as did the council, due to the seriousness, as I say, I felt it proportionate to issue Mr. Baker a fixed penalty at that stage, and obviously advising that we would discuss the matter further with the council, and another meeting would take place.
Can you remember approximately how long that meeting took? How long was that meeting?
Oh, I would say probably about 10, 15 minutes, 15 minutes probably.
Okay, thank you very much. You were also then present at the subsequent meeting on the 30th of November, which I think is
I
my
was,
slight conflict
yes.
between the two. I apologise. And that's with
Yeah.
the EI representative. And I think at that meeting is where you discussed the operating plan or a way forward to dealing with matters.
Yes, yes.
Um,
At the meeting, yes. At the meeting
thank-
there, as I say, all parties had a view to watch the footage, so it was transparent. And as I say, all parties had the opportunity, as did Mr. Baker, to look at the footage and make any comment to that.
Absolutely. And would you again describe Mr. Baker as being refusing responsibility or trying to minimise, or was he apologetic and candid again in his approach at that meeting?
I think with the meeting at that stage, he understood his responsibilities. Which unfortunately on the 4th were lacking, seriously undermined the licence and objectives from my point of view. Crime disorder, public safety, and again, really with viewing the CCTV. He couldn't not make any other comment apart from the fact that put his hands up and admit the offences and the breaches from that night. So yes, he did recognise that.
And the fixed penalty notice issued was for £1,000. Was that correct?
For no, it's for £200.
£200 on the first occasion, and that's been paid as far as you're aware.
He has, yes.
Thank you. The management plan that was in your letter on the 10th of November, or the letter from the 4th, shall I say, was that all agreed at that meeting on the 30th of November, or did you retire and continue your position?
No, that was agreed at the meeting on the 30th with all parties, with EI Group, Joe McPherson that was there at the time as well.
Absolutely. So of relevance to this current pandemic, there was a requirement to update the COVID risk assessment. This is at Appendix 18 on page 3 of your letter, in case you just to help refresh you and the councillors there.
Right, I've got Appendix 18, yes.
Yeah, so on the 3rd page there is a table, a helpful table listing points of action and dates, etc. First,
yes,
of course, is the risk assessment overhaul to ensure that my client can demonstrate his knowledge and the measures he's put in place. Secondly, that a new DPS be appointed by the 31st of January 2021. And then a minor variation application is submitted to impose additional conditions. And again, that is exhibited in police evidence that you've supported. Let's see if I can identify the application for the benefits committees. I know it's in here, excuse me. That is slightly confusingly Appendix 17, where a number of conditions are imposed. Those conditions, would it be fair to say, aren't really COVID conditions? It's bringing other matters up to date, such as CCTV. Rather not specifically COVID conditions.
I would say that it's more than proportionate with what had gone on. Obviously, requesting CCTV would mitigate any issues going forward. They would also assist him going forward. And also, as I say, from the police point of view, if any further calls were made, again, we could view the CCTV footage.
Absolutely, that's fine. I just wanted to cover what was added to the license, but conditions principally one regarding CCTV. And then, how long was the meeting on the 30th of November with the Mr. Baker and the EI representatives? Can you remember approximately?
How long did the meeting take place?
Yeah. How long was it?
In all fairness, I couldn't put it down to to the hours, but I would say it was a good hour plus.
An hour plus now. Thank you very much. And then subsequent to that, You visited the site on the 16th of December and inspected the CCTV, and I think as Sergeant Booth pointed out, reaffirmed the need to comply with various COVID regulations. Is that right?
Yes, what I would say about that, and I will bring it up, is that when I met with Mr. Baker, Harrogate Borough Council, Craven District Council, Tim and both Sharon were present again. With the premises improvement plan, it was agreed that he would submit the minor variation. That was submitted on the 9th of December. However, obviously due to the previous concerns, Mr. Baker had agreed to install the CCTV system itself. And although he submitted the minor variation on the 9th, it wouldn't actually be granted until the 24th of December.
Mm-hmm.
So that was obviously after the 23rd. However, it was agreed by Mr. Baker and that he would have this installed and fully operational prior to that date. So hence that was the whole point of the reason to go along and check that it was fully operational, correct time and date, etc. Also at that meeting, that it was a case really of going through his understanding of the CCTV to ensure he was familiar with it, how to operate it, and moving forward, being able to adhere to the conditions, CCTV conditions on the actual premises license.
And so, and just on the 16th, you found that CCTV was in operation as it should have been.
It was in operation and it was all in order at that time.
And how long, again, I'm sorry, can you recall how long you spent with Mr. Baker on that occasion?
Again, goodness, you're asking, I wish I'd have gone through it now, but I would say probably about 25 minutes, half an hour.
Okay.
It could have been longer. That's my bit, and obviously then there's Craven District Council.
Absolutely, I appreciate it. At that stage, had you any dealings with Mr. Baker before these incidents during your tenure as licensing officer at North Yorkshire?
The first time I had any dealings with Mr. Baker was on the 12th. Nothing prior to that date, the 12th of November, when the incident took place on the 4th. Nothing prior to that.
And how long have you been in your role, Jack? I know it's been a while as well.
I was going to say 8.5, coming up to 9 years, I think.
So Mr. Baker took over the premises in 2011. So your kind of relative.
I haven't always covered. I covered York prior to that. Harrogate itself, I would say it's probably about 3.5, 4 years. But I mainly deal with Harrogate as well and Selby as well at the time. So I did cover a large area, and we only really deal with police calls and problematic premises out in the rural areas. Unfortunately, we leave it to the local teams.
Mm-hmm. But reports about licensed premises are fed back to your team. You would be aware of licensing issues, specific licensing.
Yes.
But no such reports have been delivered to you prior to 2020 in these reports.
No.
So up to that stage, I think we've totaled about 2 hours on Mr. Baker's company, and you've spoken to him. But during the various meetings, I take the point that the CCTV is clear, but he has accepted his responsibilities. He's been cooperative, and he has met the timetable up to the 16th of December that has been set down for him. Would that be a fair summary?
I would say, in all fairness, prior to that date, no issues. The 4th was a serious breach, and then obviously followed by the 23rd again. But that was only as I said to you before, my involvement's only been since the 12th.
Okay. But thank you. So you had no reason to speak to him before that point. So come the 16th of December, you visited the premises. You see that the steps you required have been implemented. I appreciate your comments regarding minor variation, perhaps not taking effect by that date, but the physical infrastructures, etc., all sorted out. So on the 16th of December, Had there been no other instance, things would have rested there. That would have been the end of your interest, subject to the premises behaving itself and not coming to your attention again.
So, yeah, subject to the premises improvement plan over that 3-month period, yes.
Jackie, I'm very grateful. I don't, Sergeant Booth, I'd like to talk a little bit about the 23rd. I don't know whether you would prefer to answer those questions or whether you're happy for me to continue with PC Allen. I don't want to take you
Yes,
out.
no, I'm happy if you want to continue with PC. I'm sure if there's nothing she can answer, she'll direct it to me.
I'm grateful if that's fine. But please, I say, Sergeant Booth, do jump in if you feel you'd be better placed to answer. So on the 23rd of December, at Appendix 19, we receive a complaint, or the police receive a complaint at about 10 to 9 in the evening, and that's at Appendix 19. Are you familiar with that in your paper?
I've got that here, yeah, okay. Appendix 19, yes, far away.
Thank you. If I can just take you to the remarks at certain times. So on the first page, bottom of the first page, 2052 is the remark, and this is groups of 8+ is the comment there. For the benefit of the members, I understand that what this is are essentially notes being taken over the telephone by a call operator, and significant points and notes are going in. It's not a verbatim account, but these are the significant notes that the operator feels are important to put into the log. Is that correct?
The operator, yes, will take the information from the caller. So it is obviously, I suppose, third hand. So they have put, yeah, a group of 8 persons sat.
And then over the page, 2052-41, comment all just drinking. And then 2052-45, no food being served. And then we move right down to 2054-15, and seeing that the pub looks very full, 2054-26, all the tables have large groups around them. And then 2054-30, and hasn't seen any food at the tables. So that's the complaint that you're responding to. On the 5th of January, Appendix 21, Craven Council asked for the CCTV. Do you know if anybody contacted the pub before the 5th of December, to say, 5th of January, excuse me, to say that there'd been a further complaint or there was an investigation pending or anything of that nature?
I don't know personally. I don't know if Craven District Council had anything on their records. This is the only one that we received that was by North Yorkshire Police.
I'll carry on. I'm sure Mr. Chadwick wants to correct the record. But our understanding is 5th of January 2021 is the first we're aware of the instance. I'd like to just briefly jump around a little bit. I'm going to come back to it as quickly as I can. But of the additional documents that my client served yesterday, page 1, December 28, 2020 Facebook entry, announcing that the premises was going to close following the Christmas festivities and wasn't going to reopen for the foreseeable future. So that takes place, the premises is closed, not in light of a threatened investigation, just they take a view on the 28th that they're not going to continue on, but that's not taken in light of a decision by you to review or anything such matter, is it?
No, I don't believe it is, no.
The CCTV on the 5th of December, 5th of January, I apologise to everyone, is requested. Would you agree that the remarks in Appendix 19 are not borne out quite as clearly as you might expect in the CCTV footage? It does seem to be a slight exaggeration, putting it mildly, as to what was actually going on at the premises during those times.
When we received the reports, you are correct. When we received reports from general members of the public, etc., and as I say, we don't really sort of take it on face value. It's a guideline. They have made that report, and we have a duty to investigate it. To again, and this is really where we will engage with the licensee or the person involved to get their side of the story, and to obviously investigate it further to see if there is any truth in that incident or report that's been made. So from that, as I say, there was obviously the concerns, and because of the previous premises improvement plan, etc., in place, that it did give us concern for what was going on at the premises. So hence, Mr. Chadwick went back to the to Mr. Baker.
There has been other complaints on the 23rd. I appreciate your comments that it is, in your view, and I think clearly Mr. Barker's responsibility, Mr. Baker's responsibility to manage the premises. And that includes the members of the public, and several of the breaches cited are breaches undertaken by a member of the public, such as walking across the premises without their face mask on, or ordering a drink at the bar when they're going to the toilet. It's education and management of members of the public is one of the responsibilities that my client has that you think he's failed in.
I will let Sergeant Booth if she wishes to, because I know she had a little bit on there. If not, I'm more than happy to go through that. But again, from my point of view, I would say that as a licensing officer, and for over the years, that an operator should know what they're doing and should be in control and be able to manage the premises effectively, and not be controlled, or should we say in this instance, it very much showed that the customers were actually controlling the premises rather than Mr. Baker. He should have a hold of that in his capacity to be able to give the individuals, should we say, guidance, and if they are not wearing face masks, ask them to. If they're not complying, ask them to leave the premises. It is down to him to control and manage those premises.
And we don't draw back from that at all, PC Allen. We agree. But my point would be that the challenges that we see in that CCTV are not unique to the Masons, or not unique to Gargrave, but are challenges which have to be dealt with by licensees across the country, about educating their customers and getting to change. You're quite right, it is a national issue, but I wanted to see if you would agree with me that the type of issues that were not, in your opinion, managed well there are typical of issues that we would see across the country.
I can't comment on that. As I say, I'm only going on the actual footage that's being provided, but that footage to me demonstrates that Mr. Baker is not in control, and he didn't challenge the individuals, the customers in his premises, after all being the DPS and premise licence holder.
But you've never, so you're saying to the committee, you've never seen a member of the public in a licensed premises other than this one not wearing a mask on this shirt?
I haven't. No, I haven't.
Never in all. Right. Thank you very much.
During COVID, no, I have seen people that they have been wearing their masks.
Okay.
But we're here to obviously look at this.
Yes, absolutely. In the additional papers that I submitted to you, page 18 of those additional papers is an entry from a TripAdvisor comment about the premises. Was it you, or was it Sergeant Booth that raised this with Mr. Baker at one of your meetings?
I think it was Sergeant myself.
Booth.
Yeah. So Sergeant Booth, this was a point that Mr. Baker's recollection of the exchange. This is page 18 of the additional documents. Mr. Baker's recollection of that exchange was words of advice from you, Sergeant Booth, about navigating distinction between being what this customer considered to be an aggressive Mr. Baker, insisting people wear his face masks, and obviously what we saw on the 23rd, which was too far the other way and not taking action. Do you recall that conversation?
So in relation to the meeting that I had with Mr. Baker on the 30th, I actually produced a number of comments from TripAdvisor. I note you've submitted the one in relation to the face mask. So I spoke to him about a number of comments from the TripAdvisor pages, and there was several also that referred to the flouting of COVID regulations. So Mr. Baker pointed this one out specifically in relation to the face mask, where he had challenged someone. And we did have a conversation where I said it was his responsibility to ensure that regulations were complied to by patrons. If people did not want to comply, he, as the premises license holder, could refuse anyone entry, which is the advice that I would provide to all licensees, because not only do they want to protect themselves and their own staff, but other patrons that are in compliance of the regulations in attendance at the premises.
Well, that's fine. Well, thank you very much, officers. I appreciate your time this morning, and on the grounds for which the appeal has been, the review has been launched. Chair, thank you very much for that time to ask us questions. I hope that I may have addressed some of the points that you might have wanted. And was
Yes, no, thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for that.
Members, any questions for either Sergeant Booth or PC Allen?
Chairman, no, I don't. I think we've heard it very explicitly about everything, so no, I don't have any questions at the moment. Thank you.
All you happy? Well, I've just got this for either one of you, actually, because Mr. Grannett was making the point, which that we do understand that customers can be very handling. How long have these, by the 23rd of December, how long have those restrictions been enforced?
Chair, the restrictions in relation to the hospitality regulations, and I'm sure Mr. Grannett will correct me if I'm wrong, came into place on 14th of September.
So they've been in place for over 3 months.
At the time of the December, yes, and I appreciate that we had obviously come out of a lockdown in November, and we're going back into obviously the tier system. But as I say, the specifics in relation to the social distancing, the wearing of the mask, the requirement for test and trace, to display posters regarding wearing of face coverings within a licensed premises when persons weren't seated, eating or drinking, they had been in place for those 3 months.
Thank you. Right. I think moving on to Sharon Lord, Environmental Health Officer for Craven.
Good morning.
Thank you.
The Environmental Health Service is responsible for the enforcement of various coronavirus regulations introduced by government from March 2020 onwards in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Under the regulations and in accordance with government guidance published in May 2020, employers have a legal duty to reduce workplace risk of coronavirus transmission to the lowest reasonably practicable level. Businesses must also work to minimise the risk of transmission and protect the health of customers and visitors in pubs, restaurants, bars and takeaway venues. On the 5th of November 2020, an anonymous complaint was passed to Environmental Health to the licensing manager from North Yorkshire Police. Now, I do feel a lot of this has already been covered by Sergeant Booth and PC Allen. So I won't go into massive detail about that.
Oh, exactly. I think you don't need to repeat what's already for us, and Grant will ask questions.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Missed anything significant.
So obviously, North Yorkshire Police served a fixed penalty notice on Mr. Baker following the breaches in November. On the Tuesday, the 17th of November, I received a copy of the premises licence holders COVID-19 risk assessment. This risk assessment was signed by Mr. Baker and dated on the 5th of November. and it showed what control measures should be implemented at the premises in relation to COVID-19. Now, this actual risk assessment was laid down by the EI group, and it would be up to Mr. Baker to sort of adjust it so that it's relevant to his premises. Following on from this, I attended a meeting at Skipton Police Station with Mr. Baker, the police licensing officer, the EI manager for Enterprise Inns, and the purpose of the meeting was to discuss the breaches which the police sort of dealt with. And I actually discussed the COVID-19 risk assessment to ensure that Mr. Baker was aware of what was required to ensure the premises was safe going forwards and operating in a COVID secure manner. On the 2nd of December, Craven moved into the Tier 2 high alert restrictions, and this involved no mixing of households or mingling. A person responsible for carrying on a business of a public house involving the provision of alcohol for consumption on the premises must cease to carry on that business unless the alcohol was served with a meal. This meal might be expected to be served as breakfast, the main midday or main evening meal, or as a main course, such a meal. We visited, the police and myself and the licensing manager actually visited the premises on Wednesday the 16th of December. From environmental health's point of view, this was to ensure that the COVID-19 control measures were in place and that the risk assessment had been adapted following the recent sort of changes to legislation. All measures were shown to be in place at that time, and I provided advice and guidance relating to social distancing around the pinch point when entering the customer toilet facilities, because it's a small area. So we discussed the risk assessment, and Mr. Baker at that time fully understood what COVID-19 controls were needed following the recent changes in legislation and going forward what he needed to do. On the 4th of January, the licensing manager made me aware of a complaint that was received from North Yorkshire Police. This related to the 23rd of December. Following this, the licensing manager and myself, we actually looked at viewed the CCTV footage. And at that time, it showed that the premise licence holder sitting and chatting at customers' tables, mingling with customers. Customers drinking alcohol with no substantial meal. Customers walking around the premises with no masks worn. Customers arriving and leaving the premises with no masks worn. A member of staff serving food and not wearing a mask, and customers ordering and collecting drinks, plus paying at the bar. At this time, it was table service only. The licence holder, when viewing the CCTV footage, did not challenge any of the customers or the member of staff during the footage, and there was no provision of a substantial meal to enable the sale of alcohol to a couple of the customers. It was evident that the premises were not being operated in a COVID-19 secure manner, and a number of contraventions of the Tier 2 high alert restrictions were seen on the CCTV footage. Due to the previous history of the premises, non-compliance, advice and guidance being provided previously by myself, North Yorkshire Police, and by the licensing manager, COVID-19 control measures not being implemented, which were stated in the risk assessment that Mr. Baker had signed, and a blatant disregard for public health due to at that time, the cases in Craven were rising. It was proportionate for me to issue a fixed penalty notice. So on the 10th of February 2021, a fixed penalty notice was served, and this was the grounds for imposing the penalty were that the licence holder had failed without reasonable excuse to prohibit the sale of alcohol for consumption on the premises unless served as part of the table meal. And this was also due to, we had actually followed our enforcement procedure. We provided advice, guidance, the seriousness of the breaches. It was felt proportionate that that was the right course of action. Thank you, Chair, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Mr. Grunner, do you have any questions for the,
I think that I would just be covering old ground again. With all due respect to Miss Lord, I have no questions, but it's not that we don't hear what she said.
no, absolutely, there's no need to, we haven't got a jury to impress, so we don't need to repeat things for the sake of it. Tim, do you have any questions? No?
No
Members?
questions from me, Chair.
Thank you. Members?
Yeah, just one. It would appear, I have looked through the papers, but it just listening to Sharon, it would appear that there's been 2 penalty notices given to the proprietor. Is that correct? One from the police and one from environment.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Actually, Sharon, how much was the CDC one? I don't think it said.
The CDC one was for £2,000.
Okay. Right.
This was paid on Monday, the 8th of March.
Thank you. Right, well, thank you, Sharon. Mr. Grunnett, I'm going to say over to you now. If anybody wants a break now, for comfort break for 5 minutes, please, very welcome. So if anybody needs a break, speak now. Sharon needs a break. So 5 minutes enough, Sharon? Yeah, 5 minutes, everyone.
Oh,
think it looks like we're all back. Anna. Good. Right. Okay. Over to you, Mr. Cramer.
Thank you, Chair. My presentation will maybe not too long. You may be relieved to hear. I think I did. I covered a lot of the points with the police, and I don't intend to re-hit those points again. I'm sure you picked those as well.
No, I mean, I'm sure we've got the gist of it.
Thank you. This is a slight matter of framing, and the police have framed their application as they see fit, and you know, with clean hands, that they have framed it in a certain way. The framing of the situation is a matter that we don't necessarily agree with. My client has been at this premises for 10 years, has committed to a 20-year lease when he took over, and it's, although a professional gentleman with his own business interests leading up to it, this is his first licensed business as a hotel. And from 2011 through to 2020, he had no interaction with the authorities or the police in any negative format at all. He met on occasion the local beat officer popping their head around the door, but simply no more than an introduction, and that was the matter. Other than that, the premises has traded without issue up to this point. And we are now in a unique situation. It is his business, it is his home, and it represents a large investment of his life savings after a long career in other professions to have set up this business and to operate it. It's not a matter that he takes lightly, and it's not one of many premises that Mr. Baker runs and will be sad to see the back of, but he will carry on. It is his life to some significant degree, and the people of Gargrave have taken him in, and we're very pleased to see positive comments and representations from local residents. Of the additional comments that I've submitted, which I'd like you to have a look at when you retire again, to each statement there are a number of comments from the local community supporting the decision. Even the decision on the 28th of December, when Mr. Baker announces the premises is going to be closing because of what he sees as operational issues, making the COVID situation a very difficult one for that pub and for that community. And he is going to rest pending the outcome of lockdown 3. That was taken before and not in sign of any sort of threatened review or matters. It wasn't Mr. Baker running for cover at that stage. On the 28th of December, he was blissfully ignorant of these proceedings that they were coming. I've gone through the incidents 1 to 5. I don't think they add to the papers. As a cynical lawyer, I would suggest they're a bit of is a smoke and fire situation, and Sergeant Booth is very clear that that's not the intention. I take her absolutely on that point. But the first 5 incidents are unsubstantiated, and in fact, on several occasions contradicted by officers' reports, people with no interest in contradicting. We were operating the premises as takeaway food premises, and it was a hotel for key workers, Yorkshire Water, a massive sort of lifeline for the premises. Even with that business, though, obviously the premises, like all premises in the hospitality industry, have suffered greatly over the last year. But that other activity around the business, in accordance with the regulations and the lockdowns from time to time, have clearly brought the premises to the attention of local residents, or 1 or 2 who've made calls to the police about it. Disappointingly, they have never reached out to Mr. Baker directly and asked what was going on. First of all, he is a landlord of the community, and that's a matter of regret for us, because we would have always much preferred to engage directly in the first instance. Obviously, those individuals may wish to revert to the authorities if they're not satisfied, of course, but we perhaps a little bit saddened that whoever made those calls, and some of these reports seem to be people who have been in the pub, haven't chosen to speak to Mr. Baker at all. about these. It's a matter of regret, and clearly something that we would look to work on in the future if we are permitted to continue to ensure that that relationship with the community is even stronger. We certainly don't want to alienate anybody. The 4th of November was an abhorrent issue. It cannot be called a mistake, as in error, as in not realising. It's a mistake in judgment, and to have done that, it is something that Mr. Baker wants to address to the committee. I've asked him if he'd like to address the committee, and what we've suggested, if it's agreeable, is at the summing up stage. Mr. Baker would just like to address the committee briefly on that point, but he won't be raising anything I'm not raising at this stage. The police took that very seriously, as in their duties, as they were expected to do, and obviously Ms. Lord and other representatives of CDC equally looked at it seriously. We would argue that it was not triggered by greed, and you may think it's a matter of semantics, but it's more that it's an avoidance of sort of the abyss. None of the actions that have been criticised or cited today made my client a rich individual, and it wasn't greed, but perhaps some fear and perhaps an error in judgment, but not a man who sees the pound as the only thing in his life, and that and he puts that above all other. That is the wrong impression of Mr. Baker, and I hope when he addresses you, he will echo that. And I think that sentiment is also echoed in people who have known him, and those are the residents' representations. Mr. Dovener is here today. I hope he will take a few moments to speak at an appropriate juncture. That sort of support is rare in licensing committees, perhaps not in Craven, but as a licensing lawyer of kind of 20 years practice now, or coming up to 20 years practice in licensing, it is the exception, not the rule, to see residents partake in these proceedings in a positive or supportive manner. It's more likely that it's an objection. So the number may not be every man in Craven in Gargrave coming forward, but we're very grateful for the support that we have received. Following the 4th of November, there were serious considerations and a meeting and a response from my client, supported by his landlord, the EI group, and matters were put in place which, when questioning, the police agreed, had that been the end of the matter, it would have drawn a line under the matter, and we would hopefully return to a situation of peaceful, quiet trading post-COVID, back to the 9-10 years we had leading up to this instance. And that's what we all hoped. What happened on the 23rd of December is not the same as what happened on the 4th of November. They are concerning COVID breaches, but it's not the same activity. It's not an after-hours curfew sale of drink and alcohol. It is lapses in strict measures, which should be taken seriously. Mr. Baker did not ignore the law, but his stewardship of the premises for a number of minutes of the CCTV footage that's been provided fell below the standard. I found it astonishing that the police had not seen evidence of this anywhere else across their districts. All I can say is I certainly have seen it in licensing reviews and matters of this nature. We're in a unique situation here where a whole country is being expected to take different steps when they go to the pub, and it's important that they do so. It's important that my client educates and enforces that, and he accepts that. In the additional documents that I provided to the committee yesterday evening, again, I don't wish to go through it line for line at the moment, but I'd ask you to look at page 11 of my additional documents of an entry on the 23rd of September, and again on the 16th of December, which is on page 5. This is a positive statement from my client to his community saying, we are opening, but it's not business as usual. There are these rules and we will have to abide by them, and encouraging and frankly getting support. This is not the action of a man who disdains the regulations, who doesn't see the point of them and won't deal with them. He is aware it's not lip service. However, matters are before you today, and you've seen the CCTV evidence. What was complained of, and I think it's an important point, and what was seen and the video that you have seen do not correspond exactly. One suggests some out of control premises, you know, masses of people around every table, nobody eating, everybody just drinking, etc. And what the CCTV footage we see, it doesn't bear that out, I would suggest. It is correct that the police and the CCDC investigated based on the complaint. It sounded, again, a very serious situation. And each and every lapse is regrettable, and we do take it seriously. We distinguish it from what happened on the 4th. It is not a repeat of what happened on the 4th. It is not a repeat in a cycle of not abiding by it. There's about 20 minutes of CCTV in total of the clips that Sergeant Booth has disclosed to you, and we can, I'll come again to those in the summing up about what has been covered. As I say, the premises itself closed again on the 28th of December, in part due to the difficulties in these stringent management measures that were in place. It was not a cost-making exercise. My client had not opened and reopened the premises at the beginning of December, as was permitted by regulations. Initially, and if you see in the papers I've disclosed, initially the decision was not to reopen, but under pressure, it was for reasons bizarre and dramatic. The Masons is the last pub in Gargrave at the moment, or the only operating premises in Gargrave at the moment, for reasons I don't need to go into this morning. And Mr. Baker opened the premises not in anticipation of a profit, but in anticipation of being an important community area at Christmas and something that people wanted to attend. That is how it operated. Food was, the premises is known in part for its food provision. It has a kitchen facilities, and food was prepared. The regulations at the time required a substantial meal at the premises. You'll remember at the time the discussion of Scotch eggs and the like. It wasn't a requirement of the regulations that the premises made a profit from that food or that it was free course, etc. And Mr. Baker went as far, recognising that some of his regular guests would be very resistant to it, offering a subsidised and limited menu, which was substantial, but basically cost him every time he put it out, so that people were getting food. There is one or two examples in that video that somebody did, and that was a mistake. It wasn't connivance. You can see repeatedly food being delivered to tables. In fact, in one point of criticism is a member of staff doesn't have their face mask on. That episode lasts in total 13 seconds. It's a mistake. It's wrong. But again, I would distinguish it from what went on the 4th of November. There are matters of policy and guidance which I would probably prefer to address in my summing up as matters of law and how to decide this decision. Really, my representation is about framing. We are not here today to say that the errors pointed out specifically are not errors of the trading, but it is not a matter that my client has traded with avarice and greed to this without a consideration for public health. And certainly lessons were learned. He was cooperative, etc. The police have looked at these two incidents. They've looked at approximately 2 hours in his company, during which he was cooperative, apologetic, agreeable, and accepted responsibility. Set aside 10 years of unblemished trading, and ignoring the fact that we are now, hopefully, in the latter stages of this unusual period of time, saying that this premises should be revoked and he should no longer be allowed to operate a business from that premises at all. And about proportionality and what would be proportional, it is my submission, and I'll cover this more in my summing up, about what we think would be appropriate. I do not agree that revocation would be appropriate. I imagine that you may have questions for myself and Mr. Baker about the facts of the situation, and we're here to answer them. But in essence, the factual situations are not things that we disagree with. It's more about the what would be called a mens rea, or what was in Mr. Baker's mind when he was doing these things. It wasn't a careless, grossly negligent, greedy demeanour.
Yes, thank you very much. Now, Tim, do you have any questions from Brunnett or Baker at this stage?
At the time, I've no questions. I'm not sure if Councillor Morby's hand's been up for a while, but there's no for me at this moment in time.
Right. Well, I'll just ask Sergeant Booth before I give Councillor Morby the floor.
I'm happy if you want to check with him that everything's okay first, Chair.
Okay. Chris.
Yeah, first of all, my hand was up because I wanted to apologise. I left the meeting because I lost my internet connection at home. So I'm afraid I missed certain parts of that. But I will just like to point out, Mr. Grunnett has made great store about the 15th of December, the Facebook thing saying that it will be closed from, the pub will be closed on the following day. Yeah, and he was quite adamant about this on the Facebook, that it would be closed, but yet on the 23rd of December it was open. Also regarding Facebook things, on the 23rd of September, it was put on quite blatantly that we'll be closing at 10 p.m. Yet clearly on the 4th of November, it didn't. I would like to raise those points really.
Councillor Morby, if I could address those. Obviously, this is time for questions. I think a point of clarification. I'm sorry you dropped out. If I don't know how you best want to deal with that. Obviously, it's important that you do hear the presentation, but I doubt very much that everybody else in the meeting wants to hear it again. But on the 16th of December, which is page 5 of our statements, this is December, the premises could have been open from earlier in the month, lifting of lockdown 2. And our initial statements were we weren't, and then we opened after deliberations and discussions with residents and people who were pressure. I don't want to sound, pressure sounds like the wrong way of describing it, but interest, strong interest and desire. Opened on the 16th and then closed again on the 28th of December. So they had a limited period of opening over Christmas, which did not represent their full opening period. So I just wanted to clarify that for Councillor Morby. And you are correct on the statement about curfew of 10 o'clock curfew. My client's position is the 10 o'clock curfew was adhered to correctly, with the exception of the 4th of November. The way that unfolded, as you may recall, Councillor Morby, I apologise if I'm telling you something you already recall, but initially premises were limited to a 10 o'clock curfew, and we were going to trade till 10 o'clock, and it was 10 o'clock. And then we had another of the Prime Minister's announcements, and very, very short notice, all premises were in fact going to now close on the 4th of November. So that statement was about the reopening, was acknowledging the curfew, and it's my client's statement that they behaved correctly to that curfew, with the exception of the 4th of November, and of course there's no evidence to the contrary to that today. My client does not seek to argue any ignorance about his actions on the 4th of November. I regret it's a poor judgment, and he accepts that situation entirely. He accepted the fine, he accepted the consequences of that correctly, and that was dealt with. And had the 23rd of December, which I tried to distinguish in my presentation, not occurred, then perhaps we would not be here today. In fact, the police were kind enough to confirm that the 23rd was a matter that taken in culmination with the others led to this review. My efforts in my presentation that you may have missed was simply to distinguish between what was a blatant misjudgment on the 4th, which was blatantly wrong, and on the 23rd, individual or isolated incidents over a period of time, which I'll come back to in my summary, that demonstrated occasional slippage. Each one important, each one there for a reason. We do not distinguish that, but the behaviour or mismanagement that we saw on the 4th is distinct from that on the 26th. There is a spectrum, my argument would be, but obviously these are only my representations, Councillor Moby, and I absolutely recognise and respect that you will consider everything when you retire and make your decision on what we've said.
Thank you very much for that. No further questions, Chairman.
Chair, just to clarify, if I may, if there is an indication that Councillor Morby has not heard the whole presentation, maybe when members retire to consider it, that bit can be replayed on the YouTube video, just to make sure that members have got all the information before they make a decision. Thank you, Chair.
The joy of virtual meetings, Mr. Grunnett, this week. Revisit.
Oh, gosh, yeah, I'm more than familiar with them. Without making light, I had a councillor who I think missed most of my application, Northumberland, but we got the application, so I wasn't too concerned about that. But in this very serious circumstance, Mr. Strickland, I'd be very happy for that, but perhaps with the proviso that if Councillor Morby, when watching that, thinks of any additional questions, perhaps there may need to be a mechanism for us to address that fully. I would not like Mr. Morby to see something in that presentation, think of an additional question, not have an opportunity to put it to us. I think Councillor Morby's question is very interesting there, and I wouldn't want him to, if I have not been as clear as I would like, I think it's important that things like that are cleared up for the councillors. So on that proviso, I'm sure you'll think about that, but we'll make ourselves available should the councillors wish to hear from us again.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Now, Councillor Whitaker, do you have any question?
No, Mr. Chairman, I'm quite happy with everything that's been said, and I've heard what I've heard. Thank you.
Sergeant Booth, you've got your hand up.
Yes, Chair. I wasn't sure if you thought I had no questions. If you're amenable, I would like to put some questions, please,
of course.
Chair. Thank you ever so much. If I can just go back to the point that Mr. Grunnett has made in respect of Mr. Baker not doing any of this for a financial gain. If we can refer to Appendix 9, which is the statement of PC John Perrott, and the second page, 4 paragraphs up from the bottom, the officer there states that Baker explained to police that the brewery were not issuing any compensation for stock which had already been purchased, which would go off during the lockdown, and therefore he was going to be financially affected in preparation he had been selling this off. And again, on the body-worn video from the 4th of November at 23:44:17 seconds, Mr. Baker states that he decided that he's already paid for this, so he needs to sell it off. So I'm just trying to understand how that is not trying to obviously recoup some financial gain at the detriment of the breaches of the lockdown.
Thank you, Sergeant. They were my comments, so the best to be addressed by me. I think I did qualify those comments as a matter of semantics, and I appreciate the committee will retire and consider the difference between the two. It wasn't a matter of my client lining his pockets and believing that he was going to become a rich gentleman by doing this, but as a matter of a mistaken judgment and erring judgment about avoiding potential oblivion that was being rained down on hospitality premises generally. I think there is a distinction in you know what mens rea means, Sergeant Booth, as a police officer. You appreciate what's in somebody's mind of whether they're doing it for one reason or another. We do not state that the 4th of November was correct. It was incorrect, and the way that you and your office dealt with it and the resolution that was found about that my client had no criticism at the time and still has no criticism about that of it. But the incident of the 4th of November did not make my client, if he had not, even if he had not received a fine, it was not a matter that was going to make him a significantly rich individual. It was a poor judgment, and absolutely, I suppose his personal finance and oblivion were on his mind on it. My suggestion to the committee, and it'll be a matter for the committee, not you and I, because we clearly disagree on this point, of whether that has any bearings on their decision.
Thank you, Mr. Grunick, for that point. Just moving on to the additional documents that were submitted, and in relation to the 4 representations, I just wanted to ask, were any of those parties present on either the 4th of November or the 23rd of December?
I'd ask Mr. Baker, could you perhaps help us on this way? Do you recall whether it was a Mr. Lord, a Mr. and Mrs. Knott, and Mr. Folds, whether any of these individuals were actually present at the relevant times? I don't think they state that.
To my knowledge, the only person of those that have done the representation was Mr. Dovener in on the 23rd of December.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then I just wanted to ask Mr. Grunick, in his obviously vast experience and professional capacity, in the field of licensing, obviously it is recommended to take a very stepped approach in dealing with not only breaches but working with applicants, and part of that stepped approach would be a premises improvement plan, and making sure that engagement is ongoing with the premises license holder. So following the incident on the 4th of November, obviously, as I say, in his professional opinion, a premises improvement plan was implemented, and it's a case of that premises improvement plan was fully explained. So if there was any queries in respect of the regulations at that time, would you have expected Mr. Baker to come forward to any responsible authorities to ensure that he knew what the regulations were and what he should be adhering to as part of that premises improvement plan?
It's not our case that Mr. Baker does not seek solace in ignorance. That has not been my case throughout, and if the councillors or yourself have taken that impression from our presentation, that's not been our intention. The point which I raised with you, which we had a little discussion about, was the distinction between the line of impression about being too aggressive and causing issues with enforcing rules, and what was seen on the 23rd, which could be considered lax at best in some description. So my client does not seek to take refuge from these criticisms in ignorance. That is not his party here. But we do distinguish, and it's not for me to question you now, Sergeant, but our position is that the behaviour on the 4th is distinct in every way from the 23rd, save that it both concerns a similar set of regulations.
No, thank you for that. I just wanted to clarify it, and it might have been my misinterpretation that there was a fully understanding of the premises improvement plan, what was required, and obviously the current regulations when they reopened following the 16th of December. So thank you for that. I have no further questions, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergeant. Anybody, any questions arising out of that? Right. Thank you, Mr. Grummer. I think Mr. Dovener, if you'd like to address the committee.
Yes, good morning. I was present. Well, sorry, my statement, I think, sums up everything that I want to say. There have been a number of issues that have arisen in today's meeting that I'd like to address. I was present on the 4th of November and also on the 23rd of December when these issues arose. On the 4th of November, I actually left at 10 o'clock. Mr. Baker called time, asked people to leave, and I left. I know that a number of people were still there and were proving difficult to get to leave the pub. I can't say any more about that because I did leave the pub. On the 23rd of December, I was there for several hours, and in my opinion, Mr. Baker, as he always did, was doing his very best to impose the COVID regulations and to police them. I haven't seen the CCTV, the edited CCTV that the police have put before the committee, but I've heard that it was only 20 minutes. Given that the pub was probably open for 12 hours, if they could only find 20 minutes of footage that showed breaches, I would say that the rest of it was Mr. Baker doing his very best to police the regulations. And certainly the comment that 2 people weren't eating, I would say there were probably a further 30 to 50 people who were eating. So I think it's a very controlled framing by the police of what was actually happening. So that's all I'd like to say about that. And yeah, I completely stand by my statement in terms of I visited the pub many times during these COVID regulations. And in my opinion, Mr. Baker did his very best to implement the complicated regulations, to police them. And that's despite many people making his job quite difficult. And that's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Dubner.
Chair, if I may,
Yeah.
obviously, just regards to the CCTV footage for the benefit of all. Obviously, as you've seen in one of the letters that was requested, a significant number of hours were requested CCTV footage. Obviously, to show that entire clip would be a lengthy process, and obviously the key parts were pulled out for the benefit of all parties.
Yeah, thanks. And we, Governor, has anybody else got questions? No.
I just
Chris.
like to, it's not a question. I'd just like to clarify. On the 23rd of December, were the rules in place where you had to have some substantial meal and then leave the premises?
If I may, I can perhaps address my interpretation of those regulations, and then Sergeant Booth may have her interpretation of that regulations, and then Mr. Strickland, I'm sure, will have his interpretation of those regulations. And ultimately, Mr. Strickland will advise you in private on that point. Substantial meals were an expectation or requirement to be consumed inside with alcohol. The regulations were drafted in such a way that the letter of the regulations were unclear and opaque about the nature of the meal, exactly what constituted a substantial meal, and exactly during what process the alcohol could be consumed, and nothing in the regulation prevented people from having subsequent or additional meals. My client attempted to meet the letter of the regulations to it, but the spirit by its nature was somewhat somewhat opaque, shall I say. So my client opened the process with the intention of complying with those conditions in their entirety and regulations. But those matters that Councillor Mulvey went on to about leaving him afterwards and all of those sort of matters are not something of within the regulations, I'm afraid. It's a matter of potential guidance and interpretation of it. But the salient point, Councillor Mulvey, is that on the 23rd, people drinking the beverage should have been eating a substantial meal. And in the police evidence, they suggested that there was, I think, 1 or 2 individuals who did not do that out of the footage viewed.
I mean, we don't need to get into rulings because Mr. Dubner isn't on trial. And I get Councillor Mulvey's point. I think the spirit of the legislation was that you ate and you could have drinks while you were eating, not that you sat there and got lashed, having had a small plate tenure. That's certainly the spirit of the legislation. As I say, we're not. Yes, we're not trying to sue Mr. Dovner for some fairly unclear legislation that ministers ridiculously hold down and started talking about Scotch eggs and abusing the whole country. Chris, we've got your point.
Yeah, I think it is pertinent now that the food issue is completely disappeared from the future regulations. I'm sure Sergeant Booth and her colleagues are maybe relieved by that.
Yes, I think we're all relieved.
Yes, thank you for that. It was just a lapse of memory, really. I just wanted it clearing up. That was all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
Sorry, may I just make a comment, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, of course.
I'm finding you're breaking up. I'm finding you quite difficult to hear. I think maybe a slight problem with the microphone. But could I just clarify something about this food issue?
Well, what generally or specific?
Well, no, my personal experience, and specifically on the 23rd of December.
Yes, do.
When I arrived in the pub, I ordered a drink and I was automatically served food with the drink, a substantial meal. And I, like I think many people throughout the country, slightly took advantage of the vagaries of the regulations and made that food last considerably longer than I normally would.
Yes. Absolutely. As I say, we're not trying you, Mr. Dunn.
No, but we're trying Mr. Baker, and I think it's important.
Well, we're not trying.
Well, I think it's important to emphasise that he was doing his best to impose difficult regulations to the best of his ability, and he may have slipped up by not automatically giving one or two people food. But I was served food, and most people in that pub seem to have been served food.
Yeah, thank you. I think we've got your point.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry if I'm breaking up. It's the super fast broadband that I pay for, Gargrave, that's so perfect. Tim.
Chairman, could I, and it may be a point members wish to have clarified, in some of the footage that's being referred to, obviously Mr. Baker's been seen sat with a number of different tables and moving around socialising. I was wondering if that's any point that members want to clarify or ask any questions on.
I don't know whether I've seen the footage. Again, we have the point. I don't know whether members wish to ask questions about it. But if there was an explanation, or rather an excuse, Granite would have offered it. I think Mr. Granite's point is yes, there were breaches, and it's more a question of what weight we attach to them rather than whether they actually have them. Mr. Granite will address us about that. But thanks, Tim. We do have the point.
Chair, yeah.
Bless you. Yeah. Right. Well, I think that means we now move on to submissions. Anything anybody?
Chair, just before you do so, just for clarification of the committee, can I just clarify this point about the DPS? Because there seems to have been the idea that the DPS was going to change and that was agreed and then it never happened. I'm just wondering whether there's any information on that members can take into account.
Thank you. Mr. Strickler, if I can address that fairly quickly. The change was meant to have happened by the end of end of January, approximately. Matters were intersected by the review and things held up. I'm struggling. I don't want to be spending all morning making excuses, but the APLH qualification was slightly delayed because of COVID lockdown 3. In my summing up, Mr. Baker will be acknowledging that a change of DPS would be required, that if the committee felt his removal as a DPS would be suitable, it's not something he would resist. But our intention would be that before this premises reopened, if that is the decision of the committee, of course, that a new DPS would be appointed suitably, and that would obviously have to go through the usual checks and balances. So you've sort of preempted my summing up, Mr. Strickland, but I will address it then. But just to be clear, we are not intending to trade this premise at any stage in the future with Mr. Baker as DPS.
Chair, I can confirm as well. Mr. Baker, after initially informing that he wasn't able to appoint the new DPS in time because the person who was becoming it had childcare issues, he did then later say he was ready to appoint a new DPS, but my advice was to speak to his advisors because of this process and because the premise was closed at the time, and to really not take on the cost of changing at that time.
Yes, thank you, Tim. I know when I say at the outset of meetings, we've all carefully read the papers. Of course, none of the officers believe that for a moment, but we have all carefully read the papers, and that is all referred to the courts of the. So we're aware of what happened with regard to that. Thanks, Liv. Sergeant Booth, if you'd like to sum up or any points you want to make to the committee now,
Thank you, Chair. Members, I would ask you to consider the evidence placed before you, particularly the CCTV footage of the 4th of November and the 23rd of December. I accept today that Mr. Grunnett has differentiated between both dates, and the incident on the 4th of November, the police have never stated that Mr. Baker was not apologetic and did not accept that his actions were acceptable. As a result of that, we engaged in the premises improvement plan for him to ensure that moving forward, he was very clear about the expectations of him as a premises license holder and also the DPS to ensure that the premises would continue to promote the licensing objectives and also at that time ensure compliance with COVID regulations. In my professional capacity as the Force Licensing Manager for North Yorkshire Police, I have approximately 6,500 licensed premises. Most of these premises have accepted the rules and adhere to the rules, and those that haven't are subject to enforcement action. And one of those premises is the Masons Arms. The police and our partners from the Council Licensing and Environmental Health team have attempted to engage and work with Mr. Baker. However, the real evidence of the CCTV demonstrates he has failed to have effective control or management of the premises. The footage that you will have seen from the 23rd of December shows that he's socialising with members, consuming alcohol, and it is for this reason that I would suggest that even his removal as the DPS with someone else, he will remain the premises licence holder. And as I stated earlier, in line with the statutory guidance, which at para 11.22, equally, it may emerge that poor management is a direct reflection of poor company practice or policy, and the mere removal of the designated premises supervisor may be inadequate response to the problems presented. The police will not tolerate repeated breaches of licensing or COVID-19 regulations, which are there to keep the public safe and prevent crime and disorder. We understand that this is a difficult time for businesses, which is why in the first instance we engaged with Mr. Baker and implemented the premises improvement plan. However, the restrictions are in place to reduce the spread of COVID-19. One would have anticipated Mr. Baker to stand up and put his head above the parapet and ensure that he had enforced the regulations and ensured the safety and well-being of not only himself, his staff, but his customers. Mr. Baker has not only committed offences under the health protection regulations, but has seriously undermined the licensing objectives, the prevention of crime and disorder, and public safety. And for those reasons, I would respectfully ask you to revoke the premises licence. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sergeant Booth, for your succinct. Now, Mr. Grunnett, does Mr. Baker want to speak us first, and then you last, the other way around?
Chair, if it's agreeable, I'd like Mr. Baker to have the last word.
Yeah, absolutely.
That perhaps is the important point. So if I can try and show the, I'm already failing, the speed of Sergeant Booth and summing up, if I may. It is an issue of fact what occurred at the premises on the 4th and the 23rd. And I have spent time trying to distinguish between and describe to the committee that there must be, and there is, a spectrum of behaviour under this COVID umbrella, and that one of those instances was at one end and that the other was much closer to the other end. But of course, that'll be a matter for the committee to decide where they sit precisely. My client has paid fines totaling £3,000 for their activities. The punitive element of this discussion has been dealt with, I think, through those fines. They are not insubstantial. My client does not seek pity for that or excuse, but if punitive issues were coming into the mind of the committee, that must be put on the scales along with everybody else. Needless to say, my client's intention is never to see these issues repeated. The guidance offered to you by your licensing manager in his report, I see the benefit of those and the relevance of those conditions or paragraphs. One that wasn't put on was 11.27. 11.27 talks about crimes of particular seriousness, and without, again, belittling the situation where one goes straight to jail, does not pass go, does not collect £200, and revocation is the correct result. Not surprisingly, breaches of the COVID conditions are not listed in there because this guidance was not in existence at that time, of course. But at 11.27, you'll see the type of incidents and infringements that we are talking about there. And I would suggest that they are of a different magnitude to the issues that we are discussing today. The public health issues that were arisen or did arise from this pandemic were matters that my client tried to deal with. He closed his premises in March. That was a business that he lived and survived on for 10 years. He shut the doors. He changed to a takeaway process. He created socially distanced waiting for those takeaway meals. He allowed only key workers to stay at the hotel and dealt with those interactions in accordance with the regulations. During the second lockdown, he failed to close the premises at 10 o'clock as he should. And during the second lockdown, he did not reopen or breach. And during the lead up to Christmas, in light of the issues, he took, with some reluctance and trepidation, the reopening of the premises, appreciating the difficulties, the responsibilities of how he had to run that premises. He accepted it. He did not give it a light weight, as it were. And he opened the premises not for financial benefits. He could have simply stayed closed and not ordered any beer, but being the last premises in Gargrave, the last premises serving a community during that Christmas period, in the days on the 16th, I believe we were still expecting our several days of lockdown with our families over Christmas, which changed in the days after that. It was a rapidly evolving situation, and he did do his best. The criticism of Miss Lord and Sergeant Booth, that those fell below a reasonable standard, we would accept. It is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. 4 hours of CCTV were disclosed, again, requested and handed over by my client. And as Mr. Chadwick quietly pointed out, we don't want to watch 4 hours, final hour of which is a dark and closed premises because it's after 10 o'clock. But from those 3 hours, 20 minutes of edited matters to illustrate, which Sergeant Booth has given a helpful description as to what to look for in those pictures. I found it particularly helpful because at a first glance, some of the issues may have passed you by as they are fleeting in moment. If you gather together these seconds of actual breaching that's going on within that 20 minutes, it's about half of that, down to about 10 minutes. I don't wish to say that is not of importance, but I'm trying to put this whole case, and I've been trying from the start to put it into a context of 10 years of career down to 4 hours of CCTV, down to 20 minutes of footage, down to 10 minutes in that footage on the 23rd, which were found to be falling below the standards. In that same footage, you also see the rules being upheld in several instances. It is incorrect to say that Mr. Baker did not have concern for that. The police is engaging, and I acknowledge Sergeant Booth's comments entirely and North Yorkshire's approach in dealing with the incident of the 4th of November. It was staged, it was proportionate, and measures were engaged. There is no criticism of the police then or now regarding that engagement. The police do not have the powers to revoke licenses, and I can only imagine exasperation which would have crossed me on the 23rd of December had I received the report that the police received about tables of 8, about nobody eating, about everybody drinking. The exasperation that would have covered me. I do feel that that exasperation perhaps tainted the way that CCTV was looked at, insofar as it doesn't replicate what was said in that statement. And although those statements are not evidence, this is the best that we can find of breaches in it, which were, again, of a lower magnitude that we had. When you retire, you will look at your statement of policy, the guidance. Your statement of policy, although adequate, doesn't really add much, that the guidance doesn't, or the act. But your role here is to decide what steps are necessary for the promotion of the LICE objectives. The robust decision or making an example of Mr. Baker is something I would be wary of. But to frame it again, perhaps as the police have, that it is an example to show other premises that those that breach will face consequences and will not be allowed to operate freely or without consequence. I think a suspension of the licence would be a proportionate response. When you make your decision, it needs to be in consideration of the act of what is proportionate and reasonable for the promotion of the LICE objectives. You may have read in the press, it was a fairly infamous case involving a young celebrity called Rita Ora and her birthday party in London. You may have seen it because of the notoriety of those involved. That was a situation very distinct from this. It opened in the middle of lockdown when it had been shut for some period of time. A private party CCTV was deleted and tried to hide their interest. I think the reports were that a substantial sum of money was paid to individuals to entice them to breach the regulations. In that case, on behalf of the Metropolitan Police, a similar argument was put by Mr. Holland, a barrister that may have appeared before you before. He's a Newcastle-based barrister. And in that suggestion, the threat or the response was discussed as a period of suspension. And in that case, the committee ordered, in what was a notorious case, which would obviously have wide-reaching impact for the UK. People were looking at this to see. It was a 6-week suspension in that case to allow matters to be implemented, and also that deterrent element to it. A 6-week suspension in this instance, if it took effect at the end of a consultation period or the appeal window, coincidentally would take us to the middle of June, step 3, and when these issues are going to be hopefully lifted with the great progress that we are making. At that stage, these complications, if you feel that Mr. Baker has failed in dealing with the detail, then a suspension of that period would take the premises beyond those concerns, we would hope. The idea of hiring a new DPS, Mr. Baker is committed to his own personal improvement, but by creating a role for the DPS, somebody who can, without fear or favour, enforce the rules and be the bad guy compared to Mr. Baker's host situation, is something that we do wish to impose. We will be varying the DPS in accordance to the discussion if the licence is allowed to continue. If the committee felt to ensure that they would remove Mr Baker at this stage, then that would not be something that he would resist, as it is his intention to resign that role. His role in future, however, will be to support all in that matter. The issues that have arisen of fact are therefore not in dispute. It's a matter of in context and whether or not, as I suggest, the police's exasperation or irritation by the situation has influenced them to go straight for revocation as opposed to perhaps a period of suspension. That would be what we commend to you. I'm very grateful for all of the efforts to pull together these hearings, which I know are exceptionally difficult and everybody's time. Thank you very much for paying attention to us. And if you were minded to allow the licence to continue, it would be, of course, on the proviso that Mr Baker does not darken this committee again or with issues of this nature or any other. That lesson has certainly been left. If I can, I suggest to leave the last word to Mr Baker, who would like to address you at this stage. Thank you very much again for your attention and time today.
Thank you, Mr Grannott. Mr Baker, over to you. You'd like to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I've done that now. Thank you. Having had time to reflect on the incident on the 23rd of December and the 4th of November and reviewing the footage, it is obvious I've made mistakes and I sincerely apologise. I did try to ensure that all regulations were complied with, but the police have provided a number of examples where this didn't happen. This is a matter of regret and I apologise again. It was not my intention to ignore these measures and my motivation was never greed. I was simply trying to operate the business for the community in line with the new and rapidly changing regulations. I've already started renewing my own training using online courses in all aspects of the running of the pub in the times we find ourselves in. And as a company, we will also have to improve the training of our staff under these unique circumstances. And prior to our reopening, we will ensure that all members of staff are fully equipped to deal with our customers courteously and correctly under the guidelines we are presented with. The premises has not reopened yet and will not reopen until a new DPS is in place, and I'm satisfied that all necessary systems and training are in place. I will ensure that going forward, we will all need to be more conscious of not only the actual day-to-day workings of the pub, but also the public perception of it. I am very disappointed and embarrassed that I find myself in this review after 10 years of service to the community, but I accept my responsibility. I immediately paid the £3,000 in fines for these failings, and if the committee will permit it, I am determined never to fail in this manner again. That's it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr Baker. And thank you all for very, very good cogent arguments on both sides. All very helpful. And if I may say so, a high standard of representation to have in front of us. We will now deliberate. Councillor Morby can recap on the bits of Mr Grannott's presentation that he missed, and you can assure yourselves we'll ask any relevant. We contact Mr Grannott for that. As everybody in this meeting knows, but perhaps some of those maybe watching this is a public meeting, won't be aware of. The duty of this committee is to promote the licensing objectives. And the matters that have been raised really by Mr Grannott and by Sergeant Booth, the matters that we have to consider. What we can't consider as part of our deliberations is the good of the village of Gargrave. and the consequence if we were to take a certain course of action, being 2 closed pubs. And I'm sure Mr. Baker, Mr. Grunnett, and Sergeant Booth and everybody concerned realizes that those considerations can't form part of our deliberation, and nor indeed part of Mr. Baker's business. They are not upon which we base our. It is simply to fulfil the objectives, and of course, bearing in mind all the time proportionality, as Mr. Grunt has urged upon. So we will have all those matters in mind. So thank you all for attending. The decision will be forwarded by Alex in due course to the parties. As I say, thanks very much for all your help. And
Chair, just before we wind up on it, can I just say, while we're in open session, that the legal advice to the committee will be to determine the matter in accordance with the representations, in accordance with the licensing objectives, in the usual way. And if I can just ask Mr. Grunnett as well, maybe if he could pass his contact details on to Tim, so I can have those details in case there are anything that arises when Councillor Morby reviews that footage, if there were any questions, just so we can get clarification on that as well.
Yes, indeed. I think Mr. Chadwick has my contact details,
I'll forward them on now.
And for the benefit of Sergeant Booth, I'd expect her availability. If I need to address the committee, she should certainly be present at that stage as well. I wouldn't do anything without Sergeant Booth being commented.
All will be done openly and fairly, Mr.
I have no doubt whatsoever.
Rest assured.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Morning.
Thank you.